2 members of our CCE committee and 1 member of our CEP committee. So let's start with intros. Dave, would you like to start first?
Sure. Dave Schwed. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for Bourne. Prior to that, I was the Global Head of Digital Assets Technology for BNY Mellon. And prior to that, I was the Chief Security Officer for Galaxy Digital.
Okay, great. Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh McIntyre. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft, who I'm not speaking for today. And I run ChainToots, a free and open tech education platform.
Hi, I'm Dustin. I'm based in Singapore, and I'm a Seedphrase education manager.
Okay, cool. So what they're all not going to say because they're too humble is they are all extremely safety conscious when it comes to cybersecurity, seed phrases, passphrases, all of the things we're going to be talking about today. They have all been working in and using cryptocurrency for many, many years. And we've got some experts here to help us through the basics of what we need to know to keep safe and how to make sure that we do that in different situations and different types of risks. So why don't we start with a brief intro? When we're talking about safeguarding our seed phrases, we're talking about the information you need to access your crypto that you want to keep safe and you want to make sure that no one else can get access to. And it's a little complicated when you first start talking about it, but once you kind of unravel it, I think it's not that tough to get. But safety is extremely important in security if you're going to safeguard your assets. So Dave, could you give us a brief introduction to what is a seed phrase and why do we talk about it a lot in the crypto industry?
Absolutely. I think we should start off by that infamous phrase, not your keys, not your coins. And to break down what that means is the keys are what you have to possess in order to make a transaction on chain. So you have your public key, which is effectively your wallet address, and you have your private key, which is what you're using to sign a transaction to move coins. And when you want to back up your keys, your different mechanisms to do that. And the way to think about a seed phrase is the germ, if you will, or the genesis of the initial private key, and then all child private keys are created underneath that. And it's done in a way so that you only have to back up that one seed phrase, because if you have that germ, then you're able to recreate all of the child keys that you created underneath. So it was created as a way to really operationalize and make it easy for people to back up all of your keys in a wallet. Because the other way to do it is to just randomly generate different key pairs. So all the private keys would be completely separate from each other, and then you would have to worry about backing up every single key. With the seed phrase, it makes it simple so that you just have to back up that 12 or 24 word. So that in and of itself is what is used to then recreate all of those keys underneath it.
That was a very good intro. Dustin, Josh, did you want to add anything on to that?
I would just say the most important thing to understand is that the seed is what gives you access to your coins. So, there's 2 sorts of avenues to losing your money that we want to talk about. The first is the one maybe that people think of more, which is theft. Somebody actually stealing a copy of that seed phrase and being able to steal your coins. But when we think of seed phrases, we also need to think about whether or not you might just simply lose the seed and therefore lose access to your coins. Because whether it's stolen or it's lost, if you don't have access to your seed, you no longer have access to your coins. So it's really important to safeguard against those different avenues.
Yeah, and I don't know about anyone here, but I have lost things in my life before. It happens. And so when you're trying to be really intentional about something that connects to your money, you can take certain steps to make sure that you don't lose or misplace this item, to make sure that you're doing things that are as safe as possible when you're connecting to the internet. And there are a lot of different, I guess, caveats and situations and ways to mitigate risk and ways to actually expose your seed phrase. So we're going to get into what some of those are and kind of highlight what you can do to make sure that you're keeping your crypto safe. And there are different ways you can do this, and there are different times that you might say, okay, this is a little riskier, but I'm going to do this because X, Y, and Z. So the situation and environment in which you are using seed phrases or how much cryptocurrency you have might be slightly different. And those nuances are what we're going to get into a little bit more. So let's start in general. If we know that this seed phrase is the important thing to keep track of and to not lose and not have anyone steal, where do we put these and how many do we have? And just kind of how do we do this in a way that is safe and secure, but isn't so overwhelming that we can't possibly keep up with it? Who wants to get started?
I'll start here. So
Anyone? Okay.
so going back to the point that Josh made earlier, it's not just about backing up those keys. Anybody that has possession of those keys effectively have your coins. So when we're looking at this, it has to be thought about as not just backing up from the point of a restoration, but it needs to be secured in the same manner that you're storing your private keys today. So we're all very hyper focused on whether we're using different hardware wallets like a Ledger or Treasure or some other types of devices. Are we using wallets on our phones? But a lot of times people are just taking a screenshot on our phone, or they'll just write down. I've seen people do it in notes on the phone, or they'll just open up a text pad and they'll write down those 12 or 24 words without realizing, to Josh's point, the importance of that. It's not just about the restoration of the crypto. It's about the ability for anybody to take those words and then recreate those keys and quickly move your crypto. So you have to approach the problem with, this is just as important as I'm protecting my primary keys with my wallet, and looking at mechanisms to protect it just as securely.
Yeah, and there are different ways to record these 12 to 24 words. What are some of those ways that we can do it? Where do we put these words to make sure that they're accessible to us, but not to others?
So there are a couple of ways that you can do it. Most of the time when you use a hardware wallet, for example, they will provide you with a backup card that's normally on cardboard. There are some people that are more worried about that being somewhat fragile, and they recommend putting it in a fireproof safe, but you might also want to etch it on steel. There are also titanium plates that allow you to store your seed phrase on that as well. So it all depends on your risk profile. There are things that are a little more inconvenient, but if you have more funds at risk, or if you're going to be doing more with your wallets, then you clearly want to protect it better. And if a cardboard isn't good enough to protect the amount that you have at risk, then you might want to invest a little more in crypto steel or something of that kind, where you would back up your seed phrase in something that is a little more hardy.
Okay, so we know that if you have a large amount or you really need to secure your assets, you're going to do something like back it up on a piece of paper that you put in a safe and you've got 2 copies of it. Or you're going to etch it into steel or use a crypto steel gadget. What if you want to be interacting on your mobile phone or quickly on your desktop, so that this isn't where the bulk or the most important or pricey digital assets you have are stored, but it's okay, I'm out and about, I'm at an event and I want to be able to access this NFT, or I want to be able to use this cryptocurrency wallet for a ticket into this event. How do we manage where we store information for something that is what we call a hot wallet, or a wallet that we're going to need to interact with on a more daily basis for less funds? Josh, do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, so for a hot wallet, and when we say hot wallet, we mean a piece of wallet software that you're running on a general purpose computing device, a desktop, a laptop, a mobile phone. Um, you can store a copy of that seed in an encrypted form on another one of those devices. So one potential place that you could store a seed phrase is in a secure password manager. This is software like 1Password, KeePass, Bitwarden. There are many versions out there. but it's software specifically designed for storing secrets protected by a long and strong master passphrase. There are some pitfalls to this, but generally speaking, because a hot wallet is already storing an encrypted copy of the keys on the device protected by a PIN, you're not really reducing your security by storing it in some encrypted form like a password manager. But one of the things that we can discuss, of course, as Dave mentioned, is this is very different than storing it in a plain text form, like a screenshot or in your Notes app or in a Google Doc. Those kind of methods are very vulnerable to malware or other avenues of compromise where somebody can get direct access to that seed. So you want to be really careful and use purpose-built software for storing secret information.
The other thing to add too is, you brought up an interesting question around how much funds are sitting in the wallet. And while I agree with the strategy that, certain wallets offer more security, better access to funds or easier access to funds, and you should really take a risk-based approach as what type of wallet technologies, and you should also think about that from a backups perspective. So you brought up a scenario where, you're at an event and you want to grab an NFT with a new layer one system that you don't have a wallet for, and you don't have the ability to be at home and do what you normally do to back up your seed. I would say from a risk-based perspective, it's a totally acceptable to use an online password manager to back up those, specific mnemonics. But then when you get home and you're back at your normal setup, think about moving it potentially to a more secure wallet if there's going to be funds. So, there's the period of time in which you're potentially exposed, if you will, from a, I want to say a insecure method, but maybe just a lower tier, method of backing up the seed phrase, and then just thinking about sweeping your funds into a, potentially, more robust backup method.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think that mental, sorry.
no,
Yeah, I
please.
think that mental framing is really important because a lot of times people have I'm only going to use this for risky stuff. I'm never going to have a lot in there. And then it's so convenient to use, and then they start adding more and more things. Or maybe sometimes it's a volatile asset. And maybe it wasn't worth much then, but maybe in the bull market, the amount that you thought that's $50, and now it's become 5,000. And then suddenly your risk quantum has increased, even though you haven't changed any behaviors, because it's a volatile asset that has increased in value and now is actually worth stealing. So it's always worth thinking about when have I passed a risk threshold, and then when does that trigger, and I need to now start taking the security more seriously. Rather than leaving it open, you should have an idea in your mind of like, okay, at this point, I need to back it up properly.
Yeah, and I've had the experience before where I was at a conference and I realized that I didn't have a wallet in my phone at that time. And I created something to use for that purpose and wasn't the most secure way to set it up. And I put it into, a password manager. But then afterwards, I moved it to a different wallet. But during that time, I was careful about what I did put into the password manager. So let's say you're in a situation where you want to use a password manager and it's something you need to kind of keep track of for a short amount of time. What are some of the ways to do that safely? So Josh, I know you've brought up 2FA and 1FA and how that works within password managers. Do you want to chat about that a little?
Yeah, the most important thing with a password manager is that password manager is encrypted based on what's called a master passphrase. So even outside of the context of cryptocurrency seeds, a password manager stores your passwords for lots of different websites and allows you to have a bunch of strong random passwords that you can't even remember. And you only have to know the master passphrase to get into there and maybe autofill those passwords or grab a copy of your seed. It's very critical that that master passphrase be strong. In very general terms, that means it shouldn't just be short words, add an exclamation point or a number. It should be long. It should be a sentence, lots of words, something that you can remember, but that is very, very difficult for an attacker to guess. Because the security of all the secrets behind that password manager are really behind the security of that passphrase.
Yeah, and other thing about passwords, and Dustin, you and I were actually talking about this yesterday, but to create a good password, if you're creating it yourself and not using random entropy, there's a kind of unique OPSEC trick that you can use in order to remember a number of random different words and how to connect them together. Dustin, what's that called? A mind palace memory something? I can't remember the title of it.
So a number of people that try to teach you like photographic memory, they'll tell you something like you should create a memory palace, and that's because the way the brain works. The brain is a lot better at figuring out where things are in a physical space. So for example, it may be decades ago, but you can remember maybe the house you grew up in. You can maybe remember the school that you first went to. And the idea behind this is that if you can create a password that maybe follows your routine at home, I come in, I put the car keys down, I go take the coffee, I go to the bedroom, and then maybe you can go, the first word is something that's near where I put my keys. The second word is something, and you visualize it, and that makes passwords that are complex easy to remember and it's personal to you because only you have this memory of your routine when you come home, for example.
And to be clear, let's say you're doing that and you walk in and you see your first dog named Fido and your second dog named Buddy, and you put your street name. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about like you see a poster on the wall when you walk in of I don't know, the Grateful Dead, and you put like the word grateful in, and then you go to it. So it's something that you can see, or you think of your teenage bedroom and the posters you had there. Unfortunately, mine would all be the Backstreet Boys. I'm not sure that that would be what I would want to remind myself of daily that I was obsessed with as a teenager. But whatever it is, you make sure that the words are unique. So it wouldn't just be like door, carpet. Like these are actually different kinds of words that you can guide through that other people wouldn't be able to get. But I've used this for password managers before, different memories of places. And I think that it's really effective and a good way to do it, as long as you're being careful about the words that you choose.
The other thing to be careful too, there's an attack vector called credential stuffing or password spraying. And you can come up with the most unique, complex password in the world. But if you use that same unique password in a very insecure site that is part of a data breach, what malicious actors are doing is they're looking at these data breaches. They're looking at your email address. They're looking at the password that you used for this site. And then they're spraying that password on a number of other sites to see if you reused it. So this really, truly has to be a completely 100% unique password. And to Josh's point, don't just throw an exclamation point after it or an @ sign or change the year. Um, you know, that is something that you can very easily just throw through an algorithm and just kind of throw those numbers at the end because they know those strategies. So whatever you're using for these password managers, 100% has to be completely unique and not used anywhere else.
Yeah, and I will also say in terms of password managers in general, I remember a time before I used them, and when I was first setting up my first password manager, I felt really overwhelmed. Like I have to remember these 10 words in order and like totally random. How am I going to do that? And I did it where I wrote it down and I just focused on it for a couple days in a safe spot, and then it just stuck, and I've had additional ones since then. But you securely destroy this piece of paper that you write it on, but you can put it into memory so that it's something that you can keep. And when you do that, then all of the passwords you put into this password manager can be random and not like, buddy123 or whatever it is. Like you're saying, you spray that and use that same password around, you can use something a lot more in depth. Something else I wanted to talk about was, I'm sure we all remember the LastPass breach that happened. Some of us may have switched password managers because it happened a couple times. Why don't we discuss what that breach looked like, what happened, and why that's something you need to be aware of when we talk about storing a seed phrase in something like a password manager.
So what happened with the LastPass breach in a nutshell is that attackers were able to get copies of the encrypted vaults. So they were able to get a copy in encrypted form and scrambled form of people's password data. And what they have been able to do is start running these password cracking attacks and cracking open weak vaults. So for folks that didn't use long, strong enough master passphrases, they're starting to be able to figure out what the passwords were by essentially guessing, and now are able to access secrets in those vaults. So in some cases, people that weren't using strong enough master passphrases and stored crypto seeds in their LastPass vaults have had funds stolen. So that really hits home the importance of thinking about your risk profile. How much money are you storing in a wallet where you have the seed in a password manager? And how strong truly is your master passphrase? It needs to have enough entropy, which is just a fancy term for randomness, to stand up to what are now very sophisticated, very strong password cracking attacks.
What
There's
about, oh, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, yeah, there's an important lesson in here as well. A lot of people will let me put it in LastPass. Oh, there was a LastPass breach. Let me move my seed over to something that's a little bit more secure. And what they're not realizing is if that database was part of this breach, there could be people, as of this moment, still actively trying to crack those vaults to get into your seed phrase. So if you created a seed phrase 10 years ago and have been slowly increasing your security, moving it from different systems, if that encrypted seed phrase is part of a data breach from the past, they might still be actively trying to crack it. So for best practices, make sure that when you're creating that seed phrase, it's stored securely from the beginning. And if you're questioning that, you might want to think about moving your funds.
Yeah, if you have any question of it, you can create a new wallet to move it in. You can create a new wallet in your hardware wallet and reset all of it as well. So I want to ask another question about password manager. So we create this really long secret password for it, but what we use as our identifier is our email or an email. Is there a recommendation on what email you should use? Is it your everyday one? Is it your work one? How do you determine what is a good email address to use when you're using a password manager?
I think it can be helpful to use an email that you consider specifically for your sort of personal infrastructure versus one that you use to sign up for, um, every sort of thing that requires an email address nowadays. But really, the most important thing is to think of your email as a first line of defense. A lot of people get into the practice of increasing their security, and they first think about, well, let me make sure I have strong 2FA and a great passphrase on my Coinbase account. But they don't think about their email. And they don't realize that if somebody can get into their email, they can also most likely compromise their other accounts by doing password resets and all these sorts of attacks. So it's very important that whatever email you use for important accounts, including your password manager, make sure that has a very strong passphrase. Make sure it has strong two-factor authentication, like an Authenticator app or a hardware key, and really consider that as an important line of defense against compromise for other accounts that are important to you.
I'll also add that there are some password managers that have a built-in 2FA function in the password manager, and I don't recommend using that because the whole point of a second factor of authentication is that they have to compromise two companies, your password manager company and your authentication software company. If you're using the very same software to store your 2FA, it's not 2FA anymore. It's 1FA because your your password, and your 2FA code is all within the same software that can be compromised. If it is compromised, then the second factor has not offered you any additional protection. It was just a happenstance. They can just compromise that altogether.
Right. And Dave, I want to ask you about this part. So let's say you are doing what Dustin said and you're putting your second factor of authentication on your mobile phone and you're using Authy or Google Authenticator on it. What does that look like? Can you explain SIM swapping and what some of those risks might be within using 2FA? with a
Absolutely.
phone.
So for those not familiar, Authy and Google Authenticator will use something similar like a seed, and that seed will generate this one-time password that rotates every 60 seconds. And we're now faced with the challenge of, well, how do we now back up that seed? And now again, we're diving into the rabbit hole of, making sure that our entire authentication landscape is backed up securely. So now people are faced with the challenge of how do we back up these seeds as well? So, for those, there's a whole strategy of potentially using an offline key manager or using a completely separate, to Dustin's point, a completely separate password manager, maybe just to store those seeds. So maybe one password for one, LastPass for another. If you're using an offline password manager just to store those seeds, you can use something like KeyPass. The other challenge is this dichotomy of security versus convenience. So very recently, Google Authenticator introduced a feature where you can now back up your seed phrases. So now on your Google Authenticator, there's a little option to click and now back up your seed phrases into Google. And that brings up the earlier point that we were all making about, now we're, at the end of the day, we're now back to one factor, which is potentially just our email. So if our Google Cloud is backing up our Google Authenticator seed phrases, which are all tied back to our Google, username and password, we're now having multi-factor down here, but now up here, it's just you have to compromise one area to get access to the rest of your assets. Now, when it comes to SIM card swaps, there are certain authenticator apps like Authy, for example, which uses your phone number as an authentication mechanism. And phone numbers were never meant to be a method of authentication. So by design, phone numbers are portable, meaning AT&T to Verizon, Verizon to AT&T or to T-Mobile, et cetera. The FCC encourages and actually has certain mandates that cell phone carriers have to release phone numbers upon request. Then there's another attack vector, which is called a SIM card swap, where I walk into a store, an AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, whoever, and I social engineer the individual to say, I lost my phone. Can you please reallocate my phone number to a new device? Now, once I have that device, if I'm using Authy, I might be able to now log in and pull down my encrypted seeds. I might be able to, if I'm using my SMS as my second factor, receive that second factor from somebody. So going back to your security posture, phone numbers should also never be a mechanism in order to gain access to anything from a credential perspective.
I wanted to touch on something that we didn't earlier when we were talking about storing the hot wallet seeds in a password manager. And I think kind of to David's point, if somebody gets access to your phone, there's a specific reason we say that it's probably okay to do so with a hot wallet and not with a cold wallet or a hardware wallet. And that's simply kind of the model of the wallet itself. With a hot wallet, you're already generating and storing the keys on a general purpose computer, like a phone or a PC. With a hardware wallet, the whole idea behind that is that you completely segment the keys and generate and store them offline. So it's not vulnerable to the same sorts of malware and other attack vectors that can happen with a phone or a PC. If you take that cold wallet seed and you put it backed up into a password manager or into Google Authenticator or something like that, you've effectively broken that security model. You've reduced the security of your hardware wallet to the security of a hot wallet. It's not to say that your money will immediately be stolen, but you're not going to have the level of security that you think you have if you put a hardware wallet seed into some encrypted backup on a PC.
Yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize this point because essentially what keeps a hardware wallet, what keeps a seed phrase generated by a hardware wallet safe is that the environment it was generated in was never on an online computer. But now that you've imported it into an online computer, whether it's a password manager or whatever it is, you've actually reduced the safety because it's not in the hardware wallet's encrypted storage, for example. So depending on how the hardware wallet keeps it safe during the generation phase, once you put it online on a password manager, for example, you have melted the cold wallet into a warm or hot wallet.
Dustin, do you want to quickly talk about our new hardware wallet course that is for free and available for anyone that wants to learn more? And then we'll jump back into some of the risks of interacting online with hot wallets?
Sure. So we at C4 we've recently released a hardware wallet course, and what we cover is essentially how to set up a hardware wallet, how to keep your keys safe. We even have checklists that you should follow when you're backing up your seed phrase. We have checklists to follow to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. We've got quizzes, and we'll basically test your knowledge. We'll go from 0 to 1, and we even go through the whole restoration process. So what I said about, not putting your core wallet seed into an online system. We actually have a video with an animation of like this wallet was in snow, and now that you put it in the online password manager, it's melted and it's covered in fire.
So we're putting the link there for you to be able to check out to learn more, but let's get back to seed phrases in terms of risks that we might want to mitigate and make sure that we're avoiding. So one of the things with seed phrases is that it's being used in your wallet, and then your wallet might be connected to different applications. So they might be, dApps, decentralized applications. It might be you're interacting through a different in exchange, whatever it is that you are planning on doing. How do we, I guess, like, what can you do with wallets that are connected to the internet, and what are some of the risks and things that we need to make sure that we're aware of when we're doing this? Dave or Dustin?
So I think that one of the things that you should be aware of when you're using a hardware wallet or using a cold wallet of any kind is that it protects you at the point of generating your seed phrase. But when you sign contracts, you are approving for the funds in the wallet to be used. Now, if you sign any contract and you sign a malicious contract, your funds can be lost. So it's important to understand that the act of signing smart contracts are approving funds within your wallet to be spent in some way. So it has an elevated level of risk compared to doing a simple transfer where you're just transferring it from a cold wallet to another wallet, for example. So if you really want to keep your cold wallet safe, the safest way is actually to keep it as a cold wallet. And if you want to do anything risky, like maybe mint an NFT, maybe use a platform you've never used before, the safer way is actually to move it from your cold wallet into a less secure hot wallet that has less funds. So even if you sign a contract that's malicious, the most they can steal is whatever was on that hot wallet and not everything that was in your vault. So I call this kind of wallet segmentation, where you're minimizing your attack vector, you're minimizing your risk. Rather than losing everything you have, you send out a little bit of what you need for the transaction, and then you do the transaction in that less secure wallet.
Yeah, I think there's you made two important points that I kind of wanted to double click into. The first one is, the understanding of how token approvals work when you're working with a DApp. Because a lot of people have the misconception of, well, if the ledger's sitting in my drawer, I'm safe. There's no way that the funds can move off my wallet if it's sitting in my drawer and it's completely cold. And it's important for people to understand the way dApps work is you are granting what's called a token approval, which means you're granting a smart contract access to spend funds on your behalf. So it's really, really important to Dustin's point as to understanding what you're granting access to and what the wallet, even more important, that you are granting access to, because this is just a function of how dApps work. So if you want to use like a Uniswap or a SushiSwap, this is how they work. So the important thing to remember is, well, the wallet that I am granting Uniswap access to maybe do a transfer of Tether or USDC or whatever, ERC20 token is, well, how much funds am I storing in that wallet? And to start thinking about your funds just like you would with any cash. Would I walk around with, $100,000 worth of cash, in a Velcro wallet sitting in my jeans if I'm going to be out all day? No, I might take $500 to spend in cash with me and then leave the rest in my vault sitting in my house. And that's the way we should be thinking about also our crypto, is to think about the segmenting of wallets for different purposes. This is my, want to buy an NFT and I want to, be able to spend while I'm out. So I'll keep a couple $100 or maybe $1,000 on this particular wallet, but all of my macro funds that I'm holding for, my hodling, I'm going to keep that in a completely different mechanism. So, it's not a one wallet fits all type of a strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a
I just
really
want,
No, please jump in, Dustin.
so sorry. I just wanted to pick up on one point about token approvals, which is when you approve tokens to be used, there are two ways of approving it. Sometimes the DApp asks you to approve the exact amount. So maybe you have $100 and you just want to swap $2. In some cases, the DApp will say, okay, you want to swap $2, approve $2, and then we'll do the $2 swap. But some dApps, to improve your user experience, which is like you don't want to approve every time you make a swap. So I'll approve all of this token so that the next time you make a transaction, you can do the $2 transaction. I can do that now. And if you do a $7 transaction later, I don't need to ask for approval again because I've already got approval for all. But that actually increases your attack surface because the dApp has taken the approval for everything, which is you did a $2 swap, but maybe you had $10,000 in there. It's approved all of the $10,000. And if it's compromised in any way, for a $2 swap, you've actually compromised the entire balance of that token type if they have set approve all. So that's another reason why it's a bit tricky, but you need to understand what kind of approvals they're actually asking for whenever a dApp asks you to sign, which is why it's safer to just have a cold vault. If you don't understand what's being signed, do it on a hot wallet so that, the most you can risk is what's on that hot wallet.
And I think with that, there are some people that are able to look into the code and have an idea of what they're signing and have, more information than somebody that's less technical. And so if you're more technical, maybe you're able to make some different choices in looking at some of these things. But for those of us that are less, it is use these strategies to mitigate risk. And maybe it seems like a pain to do some of this extra stuff, moving things around and whatnot, but it's worth it to not lose your funds. It's similar to if you had $20 and you put it into a wallet that like the Velcro is falling apart or whatever, and it's going to drop through, then you would have a issue clearly. So when you think about this, you should be aware of the, I guess, level of security in your of your wallet. And then, yes, Dustin, I will get you sharing. So you're going to give us a peek. Okay. You should have access now. Okay, cool. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to show you like how certain dApps, what they have is a transaction preview. So before the transaction actually goes through, sometimes you see dApps, they just give you like a string of hexadecimals and you don't understand what's happening. But there's certain wallets that are doing better job now. What they do is that they simulate the transaction as if it went through, and it tells you exactly what's going to happen. For example, this tells you you're going to pay $5 of ETH, you will receive $5 of USD. Based on slippage, the minimum you receive is $4.77. This is the contract you're going to interact with. You've never interacted with this contract before. So you can even set things like, don't allow me to interact with the contract if I've never interacted with it before. They even have a list of, is this a popular contract? How much money has been on this contract? Because a higher value suggests that maybe more people trust it because a lot of people have put funds into it. So these are an example of how some applications are starting to try to give you more information about what you're signing. Not to say that you should trust it completely, but it at least gives you a more complete picture of what you're approving.
I think all of this brings up the important point, which is simply just thinking about what your risk profile is for these different interactions, right? Your risk profile for your life savings is different than some spending money that you're gonna interact to some swaps and some smart contracts. So I mean these sorts of rules about how you back up a hardware wallet, how you back up a hot wallet, they exist for a reason, but really a lot of that is based on conceptually thinking about what is the actual risk I'm taking, what are the possible methods of attack, and how do I mitigate those? So, this is the whole point of a live stream like this is not only to give the practical tips, but also to help you think about how you manage your own security.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And in addition to that, there are some security ideas about like how do you make sure things are convenient, available, and also secure. And I know there's like the CIA triad, there are all these different models. And Dave, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you manage the security along with it being convenient and what that looks like from a perspective where it's actually usable to do these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the first step is really just understanding the difference between security and convenience. Every time you make something more convenient, you are potentially reducing security. So from a risk analysis and a risk-based approach, that's really the calculation that you should be asking yourself is, yes, this is more convenient for me to access my funds, but then by doing that, you're realizing that you're potentially removing an additional security or, hurdle, if you will, in order to access those funds. So it's really an individual decision based on, your particular, risk appetite, if you will. Losing $100,000 for Jeff Bezos is not the same for, $100,000 for, a normal person, if you will. So I think it really is, understanding what do these funds mean to you from your overall, wealth and, how convenient do you want to be able to access those funds. So a perfect example would be, I know certain individuals that it could take 24 to 48 hours for them to piece together all shards of their keys, where they have pieces of it stored in the safety deposit box, and banks are not open 24 hours a day. So there's a period of time in which they wanted to do a transaction 10 o'clock at night. They are physically unable to even get to the different key material to put them together. And then they'll have, different shards of that key placed with their lawyers or with their accountants. So then again, now you have to access that person. So, but that becomes incredibly inconvenient in order to access those funds. So for that type of a setup, you might want to be looking at things that you don't need immediate access to. This is more long-term holding. You want to wait that 5 or 10 years to see, what Bitcoin ends up rising to. But if you need to be able to quickly buy an NFT and you want to be able to whip out your phone, again, your security is going to be lower because it was as quick it was for you to make that transaction. Anybody that can steal your phone, get physical access, that $5 wrench attack, they're going to be able to access those funds as well. So it's really an individual discussion, but it's understanding that dichotomy. I think is probably the more important lesson here.
I
It's
actually have a
also,
personal story that, sorry about
oh,
that. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, just one quick point to what Dave is saying before Dustin gets to his story is key word here is also understanding. There are a lot of potentially very secure ways to do things, recommendations that people will hear. But if you start doing complex practices that you don't fully understand, you also run the risk of not being able to put back together your backup when you need it. So, if you do split your seed using some method and you bury it in 7 different ends of the earth, and you can't figure out how to put it back together, you've also effectively lost your wallet. So it's important to not only follow secure practices, but also make sure that the level of complexity is one that you fully understand, or that maybe your heirs will fully understand in a situation where you actually need that backup.
Yeah, I was actually gonna like the personal story that I have is actually how I thought, fine, I will be absolutely secure. I'll use a hardware wallet for everything. And I did that quite early on. And one of the problems I had was that I was trying to use my hardware wallet for like Web3 social media, which is terrible because every single thing is a transaction you need to sign. And the hardware wallet times out after a while to be secure. So can you imagine like every time you do a post or you like something, oh, I've got to enter my hardware wallet PIN again. So it got to the point that I was signing my hardware wallet PIN without checking just because I had to do it so often. So you might think that makes you safer to use your hardware wallet for everything, but when you're starting to sign things without checking and you're starting to habituate yourself to like, yeah, hardware wallet, I'm not going to check, I'm just going to sign, you've actually increased your risk because you are now blasé about what should be a very discreet and very informed decision when you sign with your hardware wallet. So it actually dilutes your security posture in what should be your cold vault.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Someone was saying to me recently, a friend, about how some of this security that we talk about with seed phrases and whatnot feels like Inspector Gadget, where it's like, first I have to cross the street, then I have to duck over and I have to put my like trench coat on and hide here and do. And I thought, yeah, it does seem like that if you don't have that much. But then you think about these large corporations and how much money they have and the people who really are looking to attack them in the way that they can get their money. So it really does depend on who you are, what you're trying to do. Do you want to have to put on a trench coat and go sneak around to try to get your $15 of Bitcoin? Probably not, but at some point that might be worth a lot more. So it really is up to the individual and what makes sense for you. I will say, don't think that you know better than the experts. And I'm saying this as someone that when I first started, I was like, I'm going to do this. And then it was like, that was dumb. So I would say if you think that you've got this clever idea that only you've thought of, maybe look and see whether that's actually a good idea and security experts see that as something that makes sense. Because if these really bright minds in the cryptocurrency and cybersecurity space haven't seen this as a good choice, then perhaps it isn't the way to go. And that's part of why we're doing this stream, to see what the experts do recommend. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Just to your point, Jessica, too, we're not saying that in the sense of just trust the authorities, but these practices, these standards are very, very well thought out. Things like the fact that you only need the first 4 letters of a seed word to be able to know the word, like hours of deep cryptographic expertise have gone into these things. And contrast that with maybe thinking you have a bright idea that nobody else does, and then you even forget how you did this thing, and then you lost your seed because it's split or stored or, put into some form that you can't recover from. So there's sort of, again, that convenience versus trade-off risk also applies to what sort of advice you use. You have to think about your own actual level of knowledge and be humble and honest with yourself about what you can do.
Yeah, like I've got this great idea. I'm going to put my seed phrase in a plastic bag and then put it inside a tin can of tomato soup and then freeze it and hide it. And then, oh, the bag leaked before the tomato soup froze. And now I have a piece of red paper and can't read it. Like there are all kinds of different things we might think about as clever. And then it turns out like there's a reason why we're not recommending the tomato soup, stash for your seed phrases. One thing I wanted to talk about before we ended this live stream is how do you create a personal incident plan in case your seed phrase or private key is compromised? What do we do to think through ahead of time? Like what could some of the issues be that we're presented with, and how do we resolve that in real time? And why should we create a plan?
Yeah, I'll jump in first here. I think, just like outside of crypto, you have all of your credit card numbers. In that case, you lose your wallet, you immediately have a plan. I'm going to call all my credit cards and I'm going to start canceling them. You have to have the same sort of thought process with your personal security. And in order to think about this, think about it through the lens of a bad actor. If a bad actor had access to your inbox, what could they do? The first thing they're going to do is they're going to search for emails from Kraken, from Coinbase, from all the different exchanges. Do you have accounts with these individuals? They're going to search for ledgers. They're going to search for emails from Treasure or from different hardware wallets to see what your potential wallet strategy is. They're going to look for different online wallets. So if you start thinking through what a bad actor would do if they gain access to this, you can start employing certain mechanisms in order to have an incident response. So you could, start sweeping funds potentially to, to a new wallet. You can start systematically changing passwords from your most, vulnerable. Start with your banks and start with your, online exchanges, and then work your way backwards to your Amazon.com, et cetera. But you have to have a game plan to start off with. Like on a personal note, I had my phone number, wasn't a SIM card swap. It was the older attack style of a port out. And this was probably about 10 years ago at this point. The symptom was all of a sudden I lost phone connectivity. And some people might think there's an outage. I'm a telecom guy, so I, have a little bit more knowledge as to what's going on. So I immediately recognized that it was not an actual phone outage. It was a port out of my phone number, but I know what my phone number is potentially tied to. So I'm very, quick to let me log on to these particular systems, remove my phone number as a particular point of contact, because I know that's going to be the next thing that this person's going to do who's trying to gain access to my phone number. So I remove my potential exposure for loss of my phone number while I had to wait that 24 hours before I could snap back my phone number. So understanding if somebody had access to the information, what bad things can they do with it is step one. And then step two is having that plan in place that if it does get compromised, here are the things that I have to immediately go change.
When it came to the LastPass breach, for example, let's say you have a password manager that you're storing credentials in, and you say, "Oh, I realize this was compromised." To Dave's point, thinking about what a bad actor is going to do, they have the encrypted vault. They're going to try to crack the password and get what's in there. So you are protected from for some amount of time, hopefully forever, but some amount of time, depending on how strong that master passphrase is. So while you have that time, it's time to migrate everything. Start with changing the most important passwords first. Start with migrating any funds from a seed phrase that was in that breached vault to a completely new seed phrase, right? We know in this case, the attack is they have a copy of the vault that's out there now. They have as much time as they want to try to crack the password. So you have to go through and change those things. So that's like an example based on that specific breach.
Yeah, and I think that as individuals, when we think about having our keys compromised or we lose our seed phrases, it's pretty scary, and it makes sense to have a plan. And I also wanted to take this into the perspective of an entity that has a seed phrase that's compromised. So some of us trust some of our funds with exchanges or with different custodians, and we would like to think that they also have a policy in place for what would happen if their keys were compromised, and so that they wouldn't be running around trying to figure out what to do. It's unfortunate. We have learned of many companies that have in fact not had a key compromise policy in place, so that when there was an issue with their keys, they didn't move quickly and make changes, and that then impacted their ability to get the funds back. And when we talk about entities, just want to plug the CCSS, the Cryptocurrency Security Standard, which is a framework for anybody who holds crypto, but in particular, we're looking at those who are entities that either provide services or the actual wallets, and what are they doing for their customers, clients, stakeholders, to make sure that if this happens, they're doing something as quickly as possible, and they have all of the things in place to make sure it happens. And actually, Dave is a cryptocurrency security standard auditor, and Bourne does audits for those entities that are looking to prove that they're doing things right or to get gap assessments. I don't know why I'm explaining what Bourne does instead of you, Dave. Why don't you explain it?
Sure. We work with many organizations to both do an assessment to see are they ready for the actual audit, and then we'll actually also help them and do the audit themselves. And it's great because it really lays out a framework for custodians to meet different levels of standards, based on, the product offering that they're offering. And, just like for regular companies having like a NIST cybersecurity framework or COBIT or COSO or ITIL, this is something that's very specific, very technical, very in the weeds, which is great, which is what we need. Unfortunately, a lot of frameworks are high level. Adequate safeguards around the protection of customer data. That doesn't really help anybody as to like what does that standard actually mean. The CCSSA is very, very in depth as far as the standards that a custodian has to go through in order to meet the different levels of strength. So it's phenomenal, and it's definitely helping. And there's a lot of interest from different custodians that are really honing in on achieving this level of certification.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dave. So basically, there are all different things you need to pay attention to. There are all different attack vectors, but there's also many different ways that we as individuals and as companies can be as secure as possible in how we safeguard our seed phrases and therefore our crypto assets. Is there anything that we missed in this conversation that you think it's important for those listening to either hear for the first time or to be reminded of before they move on and potentially change the way that they're securing their cryptocurrency or try for the first time to get some crypto? No, we covered it all. Everyone's all set forever. Yes.
No, I would say, just try it, right? It's safe. There's a lot of, screaming from the hills from security folks about this is not good and that's not good and you shouldn't do this and this is not good. And, the reality is it's a risk-based decision and, just knowing and understanding the technology that you're using. And, it's not, we're not at the stage where, only use what you're prepared to lose. Like we're not anywhere like that as an industry. There's very, very safe and secure ways to store crypto. The other thing I would tell people is, if you have questions, reach out to individuals, that are in the space. We're more than happy to have conversations with people to point them in the right direction, to answer questions. So, it's a very, very welcoming community, and just anybody can reach out to, I'm sure, anybody on the panel, or as well as anybody else from, the C4 organization, and we'll be happy to help you and kind of guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, and I'll add to what Dave said. It's again, don't just think about what are the rules, so to say. There are concrete recommendations you should follow, but take the time to kind of conceptualize and think about what you're actually protecting against. Your level of risk for your first $100 in crypto will likely be very different than a custodian holding millions of dollars. So, start with entry level things that you understand and work your way up as your risk increases.
I would say one of the recommendations I have in the hardware wallet course is for people to actually go through the restore process before it's necessary and before they put funds in. Because one of the things is that restoring your seed phrase is something that you don't want to have like millions riding on it and then you're doing it for the first time. So my recommendation after people set up your wallet is test that you've got it, reset your wallet, and then restore it from the seed phrase. If you got it wrong, no harm, no foul. You haven't lost any money. You just initialize again, take it down properly this time, and you've had first-hand experience about how difficult it can be, how complex it can be. But if you do it successfully, you're no longer stressed when you need to do a restore because I've done this before. I've got the muscle memory. I know how to do it.
Yeah, that's one of the pieces of feedback that we heard from our Introduction to Hardware Wallets course, is that a number of people hadn't thought about doing it that way first. So I think there's a lot of good info in the course if you want to learn more about using a hardware wallet. If you want to learn more about some different types of security and usability, you can check out Josh's website, Chain Toots, and also find him on Twitter with that handle. And then Dave from Bourne has a ton of security articles. If you want to learn more, there are also CCSS auditors. So if you have an entity that you're interested in looking at to try to get audited, you can check them out, or they also do gap assessments. And that is, I think, it on my end. Does anybody want to jump in and say anything before we say goodbye for today? No, we're all good. Okay, well, let's say goodbye and read extra materials. You can never really know too much about this, and it's important to keep up with things as it changes. So follow us for more content. And thank you for spending your last hour with us. Appreciate it.